Well, friends, could yet another gag order be in Donald Trump's future? For those of you scoring at home, that would be gag order number 4. Who knows? Maybe the 4th time's a charm. Yeah, probably not. But let's talk about it, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. Well, friends, a 4th judge is now considering the need to gag Donald Trump to keep him from endangering the folks who are involved in the endeavor of trying to hold him accountable for his crimes. Now, he's lying about and endangering FBI agents and federal prosecutors. But before we turn to the new reporting, if you'll indulge me just 30 seconds of housekeeping. As you may know, here at Justice Matters, we are an all-volunteer operation. We're up and running 7 days a week, posting a legal analysis video every day, and we couldn't do it without your support. So if you'd like to more formally support our all-volunteer efforts, our mission, our content, please feel free to come on over to patreon.com. You can sign up to become a patron, and if you do, I'll send you some Team Justice and Justice Matters stickers and a personal handwritten note of thanks. Now, let's turn to the new reporting. This from the Washington Post. Headline, Special Counsel seeks court order limiting Trump's false claims about FBI. And that article begins, Special Counsel Jack Smith filed court papers Friday asking a judge to order Donald Trump not to make any further incendiary claims suggesting that FBI agents were complicit in a plot to assassinate him. In the filing to U.S. District Judge Aileen Cannon, Smith argues Trump's statements earlier this week exposed FBI agents involved in the case to the risk of threats, violence, and harassment. The request caps a tumultuous week in the former president's far-reaching legal battles. He's preparing for closing arguments Tuesday in his trial in New York and has made incendiary claims about the origins of the case against him in Florida for allegedly mishandling classified documents and obstructing government efforts to retrieve them. The new filing underscores the intensity of the fear inside federal law enforcement agencies that someone may take inspiration from Trump's invective and attack FBI or Justice Department personnel. The late Friday filing came in response to a number of statements from Trump or his campaign, including a fundraising appeal that screamed, Biden's DOJ was authorized to shoot me. Okay, friends, let's go right to Special Counsel Jack Smith's new court filing, a court filing that exposes the dangerous, incendiary, violence-inducing lies of Donald Trump, a court filing that demands that the judge, Trump-appointed Judge Aileen Cannon, do something about it. The new filing is in the case of the United States of America versus Donald Trump, Waltine Nauta, and Carlos de Oliveira, defendants, and it's captioned, Government's Motion for Modification of Conditions of Release. The government moves to modify defendant Donald Trump's conditions of release to make clear that he may not make statements that pose a significant, imminent, and foreseeable danger to law enforcement agents participating in the investigation and prosecution of this case. The government's request is necessary because of several intentionally false and inflammatory statements recently made by Trump that distort the circumstances under which the Federal Bureau of Investigation planned and executed the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. And friends, let's cut right to the chase. In this filing, Special Counsel Jack Smith says, regarding the date and time that the FBI selected to execute the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago, the FBI chose a date, August 8, 2022, during Mar-a-Lago's off-season when neither Trump nor his family would be in Florida. And in fact, neither Donald Trump nor any of his family members were at Mar-a-Lago at the time the search warrant was executed. Still, knowing all that, what did Donald Trump say to his angry supporters? The FBI was authorized to shoot me, was just itching to do the unthinkable, and was locked and loaded, ready to take me out and put my family in danger. You know, that statement by Donald Trump is not only inflammatory, incendiary, violence-inducing, but it's stone-cold bullshit, and he knows it. You know, friends, I try not to be defeatist. I try to remain optimistic, in large part because I'm confident we're going to win the battle for our democracy. We are. And I also believe Donald Trump will end up precisely where he belongs, behind bars. But I have to acknowledge that the institutions of government, the executive branch, the Department of Justice, and the judiciary, the judges who are presiding over Donald Trump's cases, his federal cases, have not risen to the challenge. For whatever reason, they continue to be willing to sacrifice the safety of everybody in America, most directly jurors, witnesses, judges, their staff, their family members, prosecutors, their staff, their family members, FBI agents. The institutions of government continue to be willing to sacrifice the safety of all of those categories of people and the safety of the American people generally, indeed the safety of our democracy, sacrifice it all to Donald Trump, to his dangerousness, to his, persistent violence-inducing conduct and statements. That is something I will never understand. I am not going to go defeatist because we are going to win this battle, this struggle. But I sure as hell wish the institutions of government and the good people who populate them would finally realize that when the law provides somebody in Donald Trump's circumstances, somebody on pretrial release, still in 4 felony cases, when that person presents a danger to others, the law provides that that person should be detained pending trial. How about we stop sacrificing the safety of everybody else to Donald Trump's violence-inducing rhetoric? I don't know if it will ever happen. I think there's a better chance that he will be convicted and incarcerated as part of a sentence that is imposed for his criminal convictions than he'll ever be detained pending trial. And that is a significant failure of the system. But we will overcome it. We will win the battle for our democracy. Donald Trump will end up behind bars where he belongs for what he's done to the American people, to the people of New York, to the people of Georgia, to our democracy. He will be held accountable, hopefully, before he inspires, encourages, and incites even more deadly violence. Because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.
there's that period of a couple days where it's Don Jr., it's Alex Jones, and there's a moment by the end of the week where you've got Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz and Kevin McCarthy coming out and amplifying some of the questions about the election. Can you describe the moment when Trump comes out and the choice that the Republican Party faced in that moment?
The only word that comes to mind is paralysis. You have Republicans who've been listening to Trump for the past year, seeding doubt in the legitimacy of the elections, sort of leading up to this moment. None of them are really sure whether or not he's going to follow through, whether he's going to actually pull the trigger and claim to win an election that perhaps he did not win. And of course, in hindsight, it's easy to call that naive or Pollyannish and think, well, of course he was going to do this. Why would he have spent a year laying the groundwork to try and subvert democracy, only to then back away at the last minute? That's not Trump's style. But I think this was sort of part and parcel of the entire Trump experience, dating back 4 or 5 years, where so many Republicans who had sort of come up in a traditional political ecosystem and were not prepared for him to follow through on some of these teasers, some of these threats, some of this rhetoric that they hoped was just, Trump blowing off steam and, well, why should we weigh in? Because, just humor the guy. What's the worst that could happen? Well, we found out what's the worst that can happen. We found out that there is a downside to humoring him. But in those 48 hours following the election, and when Trump comes out in the White House and says that he did win this election, and he starts just dispensing with lie after lie and unfounded rumors and conspiracy theories, Republicans are paralyzed because they're not sure what they're supposed to do about this. Now, I could say what I think they should have done. I think a lot of us could say what we think they should have done. But Republicans in that moment, they know that based on the numbers that are adding up in these battleground states, that Trump is going to lose. And they also know that they've shared the same ballot with Trump and that many of them have won their races despite the fact that he's lost his. And so you've got a lot of competing impulses in this moment. You've got some Republicans who are saying, well, wait a second. If I go along with this, if I sort of endorse this effort to delegitimize the ballot box, what about my election? Does that delegitimize my victory? What kind of can of worms are we opening here? But I think for many Republicans, they simply default to the same stance that they'd taken for the previous 4 years, which was my base is on his side, and who am I to stand between him and my base? And what makes this ironic, of course, is that elections are purposely and brilliantly, I may add, they are run locally in this country. Elections are administered at the local level. And for so many of these Republican Congress members, they know the people in their districts, the county clerks and the recorders, the people who are charged with running these elections, these are people that members of Congress have relationships with. And by the way, in safely Republican areas, those elections are being run by Republican officials. Most of them are partisan elected officials. And so these Republican members of Congress, in the 72 hours following Election Day, when all of these wild claims of rigged election and a conspiracy to steal the ballot box are swirling, you know that all of these Republican members of Congress, the first calls they're making are back home to their elections officials, Republican elections officials, saying, hey, give me something to work with. There's got to be something. There's got to be some irregularity, something that's out of whack. There's got to be something that we can investigate, at least to throw this guy a bone. And what they're being told time and time and time again is, not really, sorry, we got nothing for you. And so that's the circumstance in that initial period right after the election where Trump is making these unprecedented claims And Republicans across the party spectrum, across the party's many divides, they are sort of in stunned, paralyzed silence for a time, but they know that that silence is not sustainable and that they have to choose. Either they can choose to stand up and say what they know to be true and what they're being told by those elections officials, which is there's nothing to see here. This election was run as freely and as fairly as any other election, or they can side with Trump and they can go along with him, or at least they can enable him and continue to humor him in the hopes of staying on the right side of their political base. And obviously, the vast majority of Republicans chose the latter.
Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham. How important was the moment when they come out and they start asking questions about the election? And how important was that? Why did they make the decision? And how important was that to everything that would follow?
Well, put yourself in the shoes of Ted Cruz for a minute. It's been a very interesting 4 years for Ted Cruz, and he has been on every conceivable side of the Trump phenomenon. And he knows what it's like to be sort of run out of the party on a rail, to be booed off stage at the convention. He knows what it's like to be in the barrel, to have all of the power and the ugliness of the Trump political apparatus come down on him. And he also, by the way, still wants to be president, right? Ted Cruz wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and sees the President of the United States. And so he knows in this moment, when all of these Republicans around him are sort of paralyzed, not sure what they're supposed to do in response to the president claiming that the election was stolen from him. Cruz, who is nothing if not opportunistic, he sees this as an opening. He sees this as an opportunity. If no Republican was willing to stand up and lead the fight on Obamacare, he was going to do it because there was a political opportunity there. Even if it meant shutting down the government, even if it meant doing damage to the political system and as we know it, he was willing to take that opening. And this was no different. And Cruz looks around and he sees that there are really no Republicans stepping forward to lead this fight on behalf of President Trump. And he knows that, more importantly, he knows that this isn't just about humoring Donald Trump at this point, because let's be clear, Ted Cruz has argued cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. Ted Cruz is an Ivy League educated lawyer. Ted Cruz is one of the smartest men in politics as far as understanding the Constitution, understanding what it means and what it doesn't mean. So Ted Cruz understands that Donald Trump is not going to be the president come January 20th of 2021. But Ted Cruz also understands that this is no longer about Donald Trump. This is about Donald Trump's voters and what they perceive to be a Republican governing class that is still scared, that is still weak, that is still feckless. Donald Trump rose to power in the first place because so many Republican voters viewed their elected officials, their leaders, as cowardly and as spineless. And so Ted Cruz surveys the landscape in the days after the election, and he decides, you know what? This is my opportunity to go to war for these people, the same way that Donald Trump was willing to go to war for these people. And the fact that it was a war fought on false pretenses, a fabricated and phony war that was never going to lead anywhere, that made no difference to Ted Cruz, not in that moment. He saw the opening and he took it.
Why is it important? I mean, because Trump was pushing it. But how important was it for a Graham or a Cruz to come out and to say this and to amplify it?
Right. So you've had 4 years of the Republican Party largely marching in lockstep with this president, despite some of these sort of smaller, fleeting moments of division. The party is largely unified around him. But here's the ultimate test. Right? Here's the President of the United States coming out, addressing the nation, and telling them that we live in a banana republic, that our elections are no longer trustworthy, that this election was stolen from him, that this is a crime of unprecedented proportion. And in that moment, Republicans have an opportunity unlike any other to finally, despite everything that's taken place, despite all their enabling of Trump, despite all of their subjugation to Trump over all of these years, they have this opportunity now to break from him and say, listen, this is a bridge too far. This is un-American. This is undemocratic. This is unconstitutional, what you're about to try to do, and we're going to have nothing to do with it. And had the party broken from him decisively and uniformly in that moment, I think there's a very good chance that the entire narrative shifts around this idea of a stolen election. Sure, you would still have some of the president's most fervent supporters go along with it, but if you had the entire Republican elected class up and down the ballot, people who had voted with the president 99% of the time and who wore red caps to rallies in their district, if you had those people who had credibility with their base, if they had come out in unison and said, listen, I love this president, I voted for this president, I'd like him to be the president for 4 more years as much as anybody, but what he's saying here is not true, and in fact, it's dangerous and un-American. If Republicans had been willing to do that, I think we would have seen a very different outcome. But instead, you had some of these very opportunistic Republicans seize that moment to make sure that if there was going to be a fight, that they would be the ones leading it.
Who was the Ted Cruz running in 2016 against Donald Trump? How did he see himself? How was he offering himself in a way that might be surprising if you're coming out of the story that we've just
Scott Donaldson, urologist, world famous in Henderson County, North Carolina. We are just back from Flavor for First, where Donald Trump was earlier in the day, and he was speaking to farmers. But he wasn't really speaking to farmers. He was speaking to the captains of agribusiness, because I know they were all white and fat, and they hadn't worked a day in their life in the field. Those are farmers over there. They're brown. They've walked a long way to get here, most of them illegal. If I told you where they were, ICE would show up and try to take them home. They're the ones that provide our food for us. They're the ones that put food on our tables. And they're the ones that are being left out of this Republican controlled system that we live in. They're the ones whose rights we need to be fighting for, because these are the people who feed us, not the large company agribusiness. This is Scott Donaldson. Peace.